and welcome to Coaching for Equity, Building the Capacity of District-Wide Coaches for Inclusion, presented by Dr. Audri Sandoval Gomez, Jill Perez, Dr. Shayne Brophy-Felbab, and Megan Gross. My name is Juliet Nyanwu, Program Specialist with Supporting Inclusive Practices Project, and I'm thrilled to be your moderator for this breakout session. But first, a few logistics. So this session will be recorded and archived on the conference agenda page after the conference for 1 month. Closed captioning is available by clicking on the CC button on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. The interpretation icon in the same area will provide access to Spanish translation. We will ensure that ASL interpreters are spotlighted along with the PowerPoint and presenter. So please make sure to have your volume, please make sure that your volume is muted so we can avoid some background distractions while presenters are speaking. And we also encourage you to engage with each other in the chat. And when possible, we ask that you keep your camera on so we can see all your beautiful faces. And with that said, I'll turn it over to our presenters to kick us off.
Thank you, Juliet. Well, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are excited to present to you all our work that we have been doing and our focus, which is coaching for equity and building the capacity of district-wide coaches for inclusive education. We can go to the next slide. We all want to know who's here with us today. So if you can, please utilize the chat at the bottom of your screen to write your name and maybe the role or organization that you are from. And then also during the presentation, please feel free to utilize the chat to ask any questions. We will answer the questions as they come. We hope to have some time at the end of the presentation to answer questions as well, but feel free to ask those questions in the chat. We welcome all your questions, and thank you for signing in for today. I'm Audri Gomez. I am TPI Thompson Policy Institute on Disabilities co-director, and joining with me today are my colleagues. We have Megan Gross. She is a teacher on special assignment from the Poway Unified School District. Jill Perez, who is the TPI program manager at the Thompson Policy Institute on Disability, and Shayne Brophy-Felbab, who is our K-12 learning specialist also at the Thompson Policy Institute on Disability. So here is our agenda for today. We are going to provide you with a quick overview of the work that we've been doing, which is called the SPACE grant. And we love a good acronym, but in special education or in education in general, right? And SPACE stands for the Strategic Practices for the Advancement of Inclusive Schooling. So we'll provide a little bit of an overview about the grant, go into some the current state of inclusion in California, just to ground us all in where we are currently at in relation to equity and access in the state of California. Then we will go into the series, our Coaching for Equity series that was implemented at Poway Unified, and then talk a little bit about the impact, the overview of that, and some considerations for future Coaching for Equity series. As I mentioned a moment ago, SPACE is a grant that the Thompson Policy Institute on Disability has received. It is a 3-year grant funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Our focus is to work with schools, particularly secondary schools, so 6th grade through 12th, and focus our efforts on inclusion and transition. We are currently working with 8 schools, 6 of those schools being at Poway Unified. And our focus with this grant is to support schools to improve and increase access and transition outcomes for students with disabilities, particularly students with disabilities who are Black, Latinx, students experiencing poverty or homelessness, and students with the most significant or extensive support needs. And we've been working with Poway now for 2 years, and we're going to be moving into our 3rd year with them. So just to ground us in the state of inclusion in the US, and then we'll go into California. So in the US, when we look at where we are at, this is some data as it relates to placement data, also known as the least restrictive environment. When we look at how California is compared to United States, we definitely see some difficulties with this data, particularly as it relates to access and inclusion. This data is from 2019-2020. So the first set, or the top part of the two graphs at the very top, show placement of special education students in general education for 40% or less of the day. And as we can see, California is about at 18%, which lags about lags the national average. And so we this is telling us that in the state of California, we are segregating at higher rates than other states in the United States or within the national average. And then the bottom two show placement of students in general education for 80% or more of their day. Again, California is at about 58%, and the national average is at 66%. So what we're seeing is students with disabilities have less access in the state of California than the national average. So that was some information as it relates to some national data, and now we want to bring it back to California. If you were in the opening session, you heard the state director, Heather Calamise, talk about the state of inclusion a little bit. And so what we're seeing is we need to have some continued efforts in this particular area, especially for students with different races and ethnicities. This data shows the breakdown of students served in California based on a race and ethnicity. And the top part of the screen is looking at students in general education for 40% or less of the day. What we're seeing is that there's higher percentages of Black and the Hispanic or Latinx population of students that are segregated for 40% or more, then that's compared to students who are white, which is about 14%. Conversely, at the bottom of your screen, what you're seeing is more white students, about 63% are included for 80% or more of their school day in general education, compared to students of color, and that includes Black and Hispanic or Latino students, which is about 52, ranges between 52 to 57%. So when we look at the California State Performance Plan, and as I mentioned, State Director Calamise talked a little bit about this in her opening remarks today. We have made significant efforts to increasing access. And when we look at the indicators, what we are focused on is access. So, and what we all go by is the word inclusion. And so we look at indicator 5 data, and what indicator 5 data is, 5A is the students served in general education for 80% or more of the school day. Indicator 5B is students who are served in regular class for 40% or less of their school day. And then C is students who are served either in separate or other placements. This state performance plan is a 6-year plan. We'll show you what the indicators are in just a moment. But this is from the California Department of Ed. It's required by IDEA that we look at how and where students with disabilities are being educated. And so the indicators were just recently revised. And so we will go into the next slide, which will show you what those indicators are looking like now. So this is indicator 5 by each year. As you can see, the years are on your left-hand side of your screen. When we look at indicator 5, we want to make sure we're really looking at least restrictive environment. So if we look at these data, which are the expectations all the way up to the year 2025, what we're seeing is by 2025, 70% of students with disabilities should be included at least 80% or more of their school day, while only 12% should be in what we call as a segregated setting, which is indicator 5B, and then only 2% or 2.4% should be in a separate setting. This is what we have available to us right now is 20. What we have right now available to us is 2019 and 2020 data. And in 2020, the marker was at 58%, and we were at a close 57.8%. So not bad, but as you can see, the indicators become pretty aggressive. And I'll quote I'll quote State Director Heather Calamise. They do become pretty aggressive, going all the way to 70%. But as she indicated, there's been made significant efforts and significant investing to support these efforts and moving these targets. And what we're doing with this project and this grant is really supporting schools in ensuring access and opportunities for students with disabilities in more inclusive environments. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Megan Gross, to talk a little bit about the series.
Good morning. We are so lucky in Poway Unified to be a grant recipient from the SPACE program and to get to partner with Chapman University to really think about how do we not only increase inclusive opportunities, but how are we building these sustainable opportunities? So when we look at those numbers that, Dr. Gomez just showed, right, like they are aggressive. And so in order to meet those targets, this work has to live within our entire district. And so when we started having a conversation about this series, we thought about, just as we think about which students aren't included in classrooms, we started to reflect on which staff members haven't been included in professional learning around how do we do this systems change work and how do we really support all students in general education. And so SPACE really helped us be intentional in creating time to ground ourselves in what our definitions of equity. Our district had begun work in equity, but it was solely living in the land of racial equity and sexual orientation. And so we really wanted to make sure that disability was a part of that conversation. We also wanted to make sure that all of our educators in our system are being prepared to implement inclusive practices and to develop and sustain them. We know, right, I see in the chat here in our participants, we have induction coordinators, we have tech and innovation folks, we have curriculum and instruction. And in our district, you're going to see those people as a classroom teacher probably far more often than you're going to see an inclusion specialist, because usually there's only one or two of us in a district. And so this was a great way for us to begin starting to collaborate with each other across departments and kind of open up the work to more people so that we can expand more opportunities for our students. Next slide. So as part of this series, we created 3 sessions with SPACE, and we created these topics kind of based on what our current learning needs are. By no means do we think this is reflective of what an entire equity series should encompass, and we'd really love for you to put in the chat what you think our next topic should be so that we can continue this work with input. But really it was to bring our different coaches together. We brought our induction coaches, our tech and innovation coaches, our EL program coordinators and TOSAs, our curriculum and learning teachers on special assignment, our classified on special assignment. We brought everyone together to engage in conversations and to also build community. Many of us had never met each other. We work in the same district, but we're a large district. And so we are often spread out, even amongst your own team, right? You're kind of like ships passing through the night sometimes.
And so we really focused on building community, trust, and connection, and making sure that we had common language. Like, what do we mean when we say inclusion? Like, what does that mean, and why are we doing it? What do we mean when we are talking about co-teaching? And do we have a common definition? Do we have common expectations around what that looks like? And then thinking about universal design for learning, and how are we making sure that as a district, that's a part of our practices and policies, since especially that's an expectation of our state frameworks and our standards, and our newly credentialed teachers have that as a part of their curriculum. And so we had realized that we had been having these conversations with school sites for the past 4 years, but we had really never brought in any of our instructional leaders in terms of coaches. And so it was really powerful to get a chance to come together over these 3 sessions and reflect and learn together. And we're really excited about what we're going to share, what Jill is going to start sharing about kind of the deep dive into these sessions.
Yeah, so my job is to give you sort of the gist of what we did for each session. And in session 1, our goal was to get to know more really about the participants. Again, we were coming into a district, and this was our first interaction with this group. So we wanted to get to know them, we wanted to build community with them, but we also wanted to really ground them in not only the why behind inclusion in all of these changes throughout the state, but the how. Right? How is this going to happen? And we really wanted to, we were interested in how their roles played out in the district and how they could affect larger change, because like Megan mentioned, we had many different people with many different roles. So we were really interested to see how that would translate into affecting larger change. We also hoped to give them the tools they needed to self-reflect, implement the practices themselves, and more importantly, we really hoped to increase their ability to coach around these topics, because we were hoping, again, that they would be out there reaching a bigger audience. So on this next slide, the very first screenshot you see is what we call the community agreements. And in the first session, we began with the community agreements protocol, and we were hoping to align our expectations for engaging in this work. We knew that talking about equity and coaching around equity topics such as anti-racist and anti-bias were sometimes they elicit strong feelings. And so we were hoping that these community agreements really helped to keep everybody grounded and really create a sense of community. So this is that first slide. So we created some community agreements, and we really just wanted to ensure that all voices in the group were heard and honored. And using the protocols, we used protocols in each session to do this type of work. And using protocols is a really great way to build equity and to ensure that all voices are heard. In the second slide, you may be familiar with this. It is, if you've never seen it, it's the 5 circles of inclusion. And I'll explain it to people who are listening in. So it's the very first one shows exclusion. And then as you move across the 5 circles, so it goes exclusion, segregation, integration, inclusion, and teaching diversity. And this is a visual continuum from exclusion to inclusion. We use this slide to provide the common definition to inclusion and to highlight that the end goal was to teach diversity in our classrooms. We wanted to be clear of what it is we are trying to work toward. We emphasize specifically what inclusive practices look like at the district and site level, and talked through the social cultural context of disability in school systems. So basically understanding disability from the medical model versus a social model. For this next slide, on the top, you're going to see a circle. It says ensuring access. So in this graphic organizer, we wanted to be very clear in what it is we're talking about to ensure access. So you're going to see 4 squares below that. So including the use of accommodations, best practices like co-teaching, differentiation, and cooperative learning. We wanted to, in order to ensure access, we know that we need to teach universal design for learning, and that we need to have an understanding of assistive technology. So we facilitated discussions around their roles in supporting and ensuring access for all students. And then we collected feedback on this, and we collected feedback on their barriers and that they encountered, what they're encountering in the district. So what barriers they saw to ensuring access for students. And then the final shot on this screen is a shot of the Padlet of resources that we provided. It included videos, rubrics, articles. We provided a lot of resources. We gave some of it in session 1, and we added to it as we continued each session. And so overall in session 1, we focused on the building of community, sharing that district-wide data, clearly articulating the rationale for inclusion, and engaged teams in thoughtful discourse around the barriers that they were finding to implementation of inclusive practices. By the end of the session, participants were able to communicate and understand the why behind inclusion, and they were really eager. By the time we left that first day, they were eager for the how. They really wanted more around the how. Megan, did you want to add anything?
I did. I thought this session really surprised us as a team. We felt like we had, over the past 4 years, been doing a lot of work in our district around inclusive practices. And when we were listening to the questions that our colleagues had around inclusion, and they were really stuck on that data. And I think really hoping it was wrong, because we have a lot of movement in order to meet our targets in 2025. And so for our team, our inclusive practices team, that was really a call to reflect on who is or is not included in conversations about inclusion, and how do we make sure that our team is inclusive, right? That we're inviting folks to the conversation and to the table, so that we can better bring about systemic change.
Thank you, Megan. Now we move to session 2. In session 2, we presented on co-teaching. Our goal for this session was to build understanding of what co-teaching should look like and explicitly articulate best practices for co-teaching. Again, we aimed to improve participants' understanding of co-teaching and up-level their ability to coach co-teachers. So again, it's like focusing on not only are they able to implement themselves or understand what to look for, how could they coach others around this, advocate for others around this. So looking at the first graphic on this page, you're going to see the models for co-teaching. And this is a continuum. So if you notice to the left, it moves from 1 teach, 1 observe to 1 teach, 1 assist, station teaching, parallel teaching, alternative teaching, and team teaching. And it shows the shared responsibility between the co-teachers across each type of co-teaching approach. So what we liked about this, what we wanted to share and what we hope to share with this was, if you'll notice on this, they have the percentages of time that these should be used. So I know it's kind of small writing, but we wanted to show the percentages of time that each should be utilized. Because one of the things we noticed when we got out into schools was that we saw a lot of people who said they were co-teaching. And they were, but there was a lot of use of the 1 teach, 1 assist, or 1 teach, 1 observe, or even a lot of team teaching, where you have one teacher who's taking the lead and the other is supporting, or they're both taking the lead at the front and taking turns. And so what we were trying to really acknowledge and show was that what we're hoping that when we have 2 people in a classroom, we really want more time with students. We want those students to have more attention and to just not have one teacher going in and out, but if they can divide and conquer, or they can work together simultaneously, they're going to be able to reach more students at once. So this was an important graphic for us because it was kind of an aha moment, I think, for some to see that, because they think of, oh, I need to be team teaching, when really team teaching, yes, is one great way to approach this, but how about patient teaching? How about parallel teaching? What are we utilizing those other small groups, especially in middle school where it's not seen as often? The second screenshot is these are the co-teaching look-fors. This is from Wendy Morosky. She has she's written a book around the co-teaching core competencies. So she has this observation checklist. And this was a really great tool that we sort of rolled out with the district as a means to create a common language and understanding of what we are wanting to see when we go out into classrooms and what we were expecting. This tool, we've sort of been working with this tool a lot now. There's look fors, listen fors, and ask fors for when it comes to co-planning. And so this is a really great tool to help build that understanding. The next thing we did, you're going to see a box around scenarios. So we wanted to provide coaches with scenarios, with moments to where they got to use their areas of expertise. You know, like we said, we had tech TOSAs, we had English learner TOSAs, inclusive practices TOSAs. We had such a wonderful group that we could pull from and get their ideas from. So we gave them 2 barriers or dilemmas that they had to address, and they had come up with some solutions. And the other slide, the final screenshot here, is we showed barriers. What are the barriers that we are seeing out there to co-teaching? What is in the way of us getting this done? And we gave a plethora of tools in our Padlet that sort of addressed those, right? So if you look here, one of the barriers was, you know, that co-teaching relationship. The co-teaching relationship is new and their roles are unclear. So you have 5 different tools here on the right, Padlet tools that you could access to help address that barrier. Overall, in session 2, we focused on the how of co-teaching. We also articulated the best practices for co-teaching, and we even considered like system-wide considerations that needed to be thought about. And we continue to build community using those protocols. Did you want to add anything, Megan? Are we okay here?
Well, I wanted to really share that these protocols were really powerful, especially the co-teaching rubric. So following this session, I had colleagues from other departments come to me and say, now I get it, right? Like now I understand what it is we're talking about when we're talking about co-teaching. And from that session, we started to have more partnership with our district colleagues. So some of our induction coaches reached out and said, hey, like I'm going to meet with my mentees in a couple of weeks. Would you be able to come with me and attend so that you can help answer some of their questions they have around co-teaching? And I think that's really powerful, because if we hadn't been brought together by space, we wouldn't have known each other, and we wouldn't have known that this is who we could talk to and could bring in to support. So that really kind of started this kind of new conversation in our district amongst like, how do we share our knowledge together to better support our teachers and our students? So that session, I think, really kicked off some great relationships.
And that's what I was going to mention about session 3. Finally, in session 3, I feel like our team knew their team a lot better. And so we could really, I felt like it was much more fun to plan the 3rd session, because we knew them much better than we did on, say, the 1st session. We had built a relationship with them, which was a wonderful part of it. So in session 3, we presented Universal Design for Learning. Our main goal in this session was to have the participants experience UDL. So we intentionally planned the sessions, rooting them in UDL. And as we presented, we specifically highlighted the moves that we made as presenters to provide clear, concrete examples. And we wanted to model for the coaches. We stopped intermittently to call out the practices that we were intentionally using, which we felt was extremely well received. When we got the survey data back, it was very well received by the participants. This session, the 3rd session, was the most highly rated out of all the 3. And so we had several people say it was their favorite session. In our next slide, you're going to see the first in the first screenshot, we provided statistics to highlight the disparity between students with disabilities and their gen ed peers. We wanted to show the graduation statistics. So this slide shows that in 2009, 2010, so if you look at, we're looking from 2009 to 2010, and then 2019 to 2020 school years. So we're looking at, you know, a big gap of time, right? While there was some improvement, there continued to be disparity between students with and without disability. So for the 2019 and 20 school year, 68% of students with IEPs graduated high school with a diploma, and 84% of peers graduated. After providing this data, the coaches were posed the question. Here's the question we posed to them. Given that most students with disabilities have average intelligence, where are the barriers for them? Can we address some of these barriers through UDL? So this was really just something we wanted to highlight. You know, at the Thompson Policy Institute, we really like to look at the future of students. You know, like we're with them for only a short period of time in this middle school group that we're with, but we already need to be thinking about their future. Are we thinking about post high school and their outcomes? And the second slide here that you'll see is about edu protocols. We used, again, we used protocols, but there are some really fun ones that are out there for teachers to use with students. And so we wanted to model the use of them. They're called edu protocols. We specifically used one called the Fast and Curious quiz protocol, which basically helped us to get an assessment baseline of what the teachers knew around universal design for learning. And it sort of gave them an access point so they could determine what level they needed more support in, what did they need, what did they know already around UDL, and what did they want to know. And we had some activities that were connected to that. This next slide is again, like I said, we did the jigsaw activities. We wanted to model what it is we were looking for teachers to use in the classroom. So this one was the design expert activity, where there is an expert group and a base group, group, and each person has an activity and a group of people that they need to teach the information that they went and learned. We made sure to model as much as we could the use of choice, the use of expression, action and expression. We tried again to call these things out so that coaches could see these ideas in action. And then the final screenshot here is the Padlet of UDL tips. So we, in our Padlet, we had UDL tips for students with significant disabilities. You know, oftentimes we think about inclusion for students with the mild, moderate disabilities, and a lot of times the students with significant disabilities don't get a chance. And so we really wanted to say, you know, we want to think about the students that we're not always talking about, and really help them to understand that when we say inclusion, we're not just saying our students with learning disabilities or more mild disabilities. We want to think of all students. So we did an activity around that to engage in some thought and some learning around that. And that was the end of session 3. Session 3 was like a culmination of all 3 sessions, and we brought it all together. And we really hoped by the end that coaches felt strongly enough to go and advocate for inclusion, implement these strategies, coach around them. Did I miss anything, Megan?
That was wonderful. I was going to add that this session for me also was my favorite session to attend. And one of the aha moments we had was that we, in our different departments, were using different language to talk about UDL. And so that was really confusing our teachers, right? Because I would be talking about UDL, and then our ed tech coaches would be talking about blended learning and playlists and voice and choice. And so our teachers thought these were like 2 separate things. And this has really helped us as a district. I was just in a meeting earlier this week with representatives from each department, really talking about how do we make UDL the thing that we all, the umbrella, that we're all working under in order to expand access for all of our students. And so I think this session like spurs that conversation. And we were also really surprised on like which some of our coaches had really minimal knowledge about universal design for learning. And so that was a great reminder that like we need to make sure that whenever we're doing PD around this, that we invite everyone and maybe offer more opportunities for people to make their own choices about what they do and do not attend for professional learning. So not only was it one of our most engaging sessions, but I think really helps us kind of direct our focus. And we also as coaches learned some strategies about like, what's the power of intentionally calling out your teacher moves. And so that's actually work we've been doing in some of our other professional development of like pausing and saying, why are we doing this? Like, why does this matter? And how is it impacting our learning target? So it was well received. And I was really disappointed that it was our last one.
Yeah, it was a sad day, the last one, but I'm going to go ahead and let Shayne take it over and talk about impact.
Thank you, Jill and Megan, for providing that overview of the series. So we get to talk now a little bit about what the impact is for those 3 sessions. And so what's unique is oftentimes districts provide professional development, but there's not always an entity or a process for reflecting on, what was the impact? Was it useful? Did it help? In this case, coaches in any way in their practice. And so we collected 2 types of data. The first was a survey at the end of each session to gather information. And so based on those surveys, we compiled all the data. 88 of participants said they plan to incorporate what they learned into their practices. 82% of participants plan to share what they learned with their colleagues, and 87% of participants found the session valuable. So overall, our feedback was positive, and we noticed that each session had a different value to the individuals based on the coach's specific role. So they had options to write into those surveys. And so, for example, the inclusive practices team found a lot of value in the inclusion session, where the induction coaches found a lot of value in the UDL session as they're working with those new teachers and sort of coaching around what UDL looks like and how to implement that into the classroom and ways to self-evaluate if you're using UDL. And so we also had an opportunity to do some interviews with participants. So this slide here shows 4 graphs showing the participants' rating of their knowledge before and after the co-teaching session around the understanding of the 6 models, the understanding of barriers to inclusion, and coaching others around co-teaching, utilizing equitable tools to evaluate co-teaching partnerships, and strategies and tools to support teachers in their co-teaching practice. So the blue portion of the graph shows the before, the orange is their rating after. And what we wanted to see is the orange shift to the left, right? Because that would say that they have more knowledge after the session, better understanding after participating in the sessions. And so for all of the graphs, we did see that shift for the left, except for the understanding barriers to inclusion and coaching others around co-teaching. There was little movement from before to after. And so when we were thinking about sort of the reason behind that, why maybe, that we didn't move that needle as much, we think that it may be because for participants, their role is not to coach teachers around co-teaching, right? Many of these TOSAs are, curriculum TOSAs, or they're working on intervention. They're not specific to the special ed population and helping support around co-teaching. And we know it's important for all coaches to have a solid understanding of the components and the barriers to co-teaching so they can help teachers brainstorm and connect teachers with appropriate support. In one interview, it was interesting to sort of learn more about some of the reasoning behind this. In one interview, a participant shared they didn't feel comfortable coaching specifically around students with disabilities because she didn't have a special education background, which kind of speaks to that, little movement in that area. However, she did feel better prepared to help teachers problem solve strategies to support individuals who were struggling regardless of disability label. So there seems to be a little bit of disconnect still between this is a group of special education students and they need support versus here is a student who may have a disability who needs support. And so that's just something for us to keep in mind for next time, to think about, where that tension lies between that disability label and then just the supporting of all students, and how that IEP lens impacts what coaches are comfortable supporting around. And then our next slide is from the UDL session that shows, again, our before and after. And so these questions focused on the understanding of the principles of UDL, understanding the barriers to inclusion, and action steps to foster equitable learning environments, evaluating the effectiveness of UDL implementation, and strategies and tools to support students in engagement, agency, and belonging. And again, the blue highlights the knowledge before the session, the orange highlights the knowledge after the session. And again, we want to see that orange shift to the left, which in this case we do for all of the graphs. And so based on this data and our feedback, the biggest improvement in data was in this session. And so Jill had mentioned that earlier, that we had really positive feedback. And in part, we believe it's because the topic of UDL strongly impacts all coaches. And so there may have been more buy-in to this session. It was also our final session, so they knew us, we had built trust with them. We were also very explicit about what the UDL strategies were that we were using in this session. And in previous sessions, we had provided strategies and supports. We didn't specifically call them out along the way, though. So that was something that came out of our reflection process after each session. So that is definitely something we want to keep in mind for future presentations, future iterations of this series, to ensure that we're specifically calling out those teacher moves as we use them as presenters, so that coaches have those concrete examples and things that they can share when they go to work with teachers. And so our interviews, we had qualitative themes that came from the interviews. We only had 4 people respond out of we had about 30 attend the sessions. So it is a small sample size, but it did give us some valuable information and some key takeaways. And specifically, our interviewees talked about the importance of establishing a learning community. So this series brought together leaders and coordinators who typically work in silos, and coaches felt better connected to work with others who are outside their role. So because they're all working in different places, right, and they're supporting, they mentioned one of the barriers to the coaching work was that they may be supporting, a teacher who's going through induction, but they have a co-teach partner. And so the induction coach can't support the co-teach partner because they're not a new teacher. So that creates a barrier. Well, because of this series, there was an option then to know who in the district is someone that could support the co-teach partner and to bring them in and to provide more holistic coaching for the pair instead of just one teacher. And so we had several participants in the interview mention that it was helpful to know who they needed to reach out to, that they saw other coaches on campus and had an opportunity to connect and debrief and plan for activities moving forward, and even thinking around training and working together to create training that address all needs of teachers rather than just focusing on, special education or something like that. And one of our other themes was the awareness of tools and resources. And so one participant shared, I have more tools in my toolbox so that when I have a conversation with a classroom teacher, that I might be apprehensive or unsure how to offer more opportunities for students with disabilities in their own classroom. Now I have resources. So I can be a support person instead of saying, I'm not really sure. So my toolbox has expanded based on the sessions with you guys, and this just leads to more classroom implementation and teacher comfort level with inclusion. So we thought that quote really captured kind of the impact of the awareness of the tools and resources. And I know several of you in the chat have mentioned access to the Padlet. So the one we have right now does have specific information to the district, and we can provide a revised version to SIP to post. And then our next theme was the demonstration of strategies. And so this was really something that came up as far as like concrete examples. So We used different tools, protocols, videos to help ground what we were talking about in actual practice. We had our coaches engage in actual activities that teachers could use in the classroom. And so participants thought that was valuable. One shared, we got to experience the strategies as learners and then reflect on them as leaders. So this was just something for us to keep in mind moving forward, that the more we can call out those strategies too helps provide, again, those concrete examples. And then our final theme was building knowledge of inclusive practices. And coaches shared that they walked away with a better understanding of why inclusion is happening, both from a state and a district perspective. So providing that data was really key that we did in the first session. And then we embedded data throughout the other sessions that were specific to, national data, California data, and data related to Poway. That really helped demystify district initiatives and help teachers and coaches understand, why changes are being made instead of it just seeming like a kind of unknown district decision. And so after this series, coaches shared they felt better able to articulate laws with what students are entitled to so that they can help teachers look at current practices and then create concrete change that aligns with inclusive practices. And then on our next slide, we had our considerations for future series. So we want to continue to intentionally design activities using co-teaching in UDL. Again, I said it a lot of times, but call out those practices so that those teacher moves surrounding co-teaching, surrounding UDL, engagement, flexibility, differentiation, all of those we want to explicitly state. So we did the presentation always in pairs, or there were 3 of us there. And so we had opportunities to engage coaches in those different co-teaching models. And then building trust and community was an integral part of the series. Definitely people have strong feelings around the topic of equity, and coaches are working with people that they've never met before. So we needed time to build those relationships. That's why we embedded those community agreements and other SEL activities. And it helps model too for coaches activities that they could take into their classroom or their work with teachers in order to support building community with teachers that they may be unfamiliar with. And then embedding our anti-racist and anti-bias. Like I mentioned, that was, integral to the series, and that there are the strong feelings around it. And so giving people time to process it, I think it helped that the series was spaced out and that we got to, have time in between to think and process, to meet with colleagues and discuss, and then come back. We definitely noticed, more questions and more engagement as the series went on. And then we would like to increase the number of sessions in the series, possibly making it 5-part to continue throughout the school year, so that we continue to build allies and coaches for creating systematic change. And we also covered a lot of information. So what we shared with you guys was just a snippet. There were activities that we planned for that we had to cut out just due to time when we were actually going through activities. Some things we expanded, gave more time than we thought we would because it was working so well for the group we were with. So those additional sessions would allow for extra time for coaches to reflect and engage and think about the resources, and more time to build connections with coaches that they may be unfamiliar with. We also considered in a different professional development we did with the same district, we provided site-specific data around inclusion. And that was something that, was brought up as feedback, that the coaches were interested in seeing what the data looks like school to school, so they can see where schools need support, what feeder schools look like, and get a bigger picture of the district. Because it is a decentralized district, each site engages in inclusive practices differently. And so they thought that would be helpful as something to help ground their work. And then disability as part of disability, equity, inclusion. So we focused on this mainly in the first session. We'd like to see a stronger thread throughout the sessions to help with some of that thinking around disability and how really a student with a disability is still a student in a classroom. So anyone can provide support regardless of their label. And so we also thought about reordering the sessions, possibly having the UDL session first, as that's what coaches felt most comfortable with and was most applicable to them. It also provides a springboard to talk about some of the more intense topics that we covered in the inclusion section. And then finally, more activities around coaching and providing feedback. So to have more in-depth topics about coaching was helpful for participants. And just giving background on, inclusion co-teaching and UDL is an integral part of being a good coach because they need that content knowledge to be able to coach others around it. But they also wanted more information about specific coaching practices. So there was definitely tension in trying to find a balance between providing both. And it seems like based on feedback, they wanted more opportunity to practice those coaching tools. And then I will go ahead and pass it over to Audri.
Thanks, Shayne. So these are some considerations for schools and districts who are engaging in this work. The first one is alignment with the LCAP and or the strategic plan of the school or district. If you're not familiar with the LCAP is the Local Control and Accountability Plan. And it's a tool for schools and districts to help them set goals, plan actions, leverage any resources that they may have to meet the needs of all students and to improve student outcomes. So it's a plan, and if this focus is built in within the plan or within at least the strategic plan, then it will allow more work like this and a more focused effort on equity and access for all students. The second one, district vision and priorities. We were working with, as you know, Poway Unified, and we had great support from district leadership as well as from their board. And their vision and priorities do focus on equity. And so this allowed us to seamlessly come in and support their existing efforts and work with Poway. Additionally, sharing data with all stakeholders. This was a critical piece as we started at the beginning of this presentation. Sometimes these coaches and mentors and induction coaches are left out of the professional development that teachers are provided. And so when they're going in there to support them, it's critical that they are up to date with the data, the research, and the implementation of evidence-based practices so they can support them to the best of their abilities in their coaching capacity. Funding and time allocation. As part of our work with Poway, we've been able to provide a stipend per site so that districts or that the schools could do could work together. And so we were able to provide that. But for schools and districts to make this a focused and intentional effort, funding needs to be put towards this particular area, as well as ensuring that there's allocated time to properly train and build the capacity of all at the school site, and particularly this core group that we were working with in this Coaching for Equity series. And lastly, some considerations are there opportunities for various coaches to get together for this common training, so messaging is the same. We talked about, we had about a group of about 30 coaches and coordinators who came and engaged in this session or in these sessions, and they were although they worked within the same district, some of them had never even had any conversations with one another because they are they're working in their own specific expertise area. Like a tech coach may not be working necessarily with the induction coaches. So bringing all of these various stakeholders together, so to provide them with some common professional development in the areas of equity or equitable practices so that they have the capacity to support those in the classrooms was critical. And so that common planning time and common training, common messaging is critical for if we're looking at school-wide or district-wide practices to change.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. Thank you to our amazing presenters, and thank you to our attendees for your allyship to all of our students with disabilities and their family. It's our mission at SIP to grow our educational system, to innovate, include, and impact outcomes positively for all students from birth to adulthood and beyond. The presentation slides and resources can be accessed in the session description session on the Fee Fairs agenda page. Be sure to join us for additional breakouts, and they're happening at 11:10, so you have roughly about a 10-minute break. Also connect in the social lounge with like-minded attendees, and don't forget to post on social media using our hashtag SIPCon 2023. And I think that's it for us today. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoy your 10-minute break, and we will see you at the next session at 11:10.